Hey guys, Marshall Apologist here again. No updates on the Quran thing yet. That was literally last night that I made that video. Oh, hi Kitty. I don't have anything about that, but I did want to update some people on some other things here. I've been debating somebody a little bit on in a Christian discussion forum who is not a Christian, is thoroughly convinced of some certain things in reference to Christian history that just don't really pan out. And I just kind of wanted to throw this video out there as a way to tell everybody that is a Christian that you have way more of a historical basis for your faith than probably you've ever been led to believe, unless you're really well informed on the matter. So this person that I'm debating with is bringing up certain points like, well, there's Pauline Christianity, and that's just the Christianity that you know, but there have been lots of other Christianities that have existed, and there are lots of all these other gospels and these other traditions that have all these other books, and it sounds very convincing if you've never heard of any of it before. And the theory basically is that, well, the gospels were they weren't written by Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John. And there's some reasons that you might say that even if you are a Christian, but nevertheless, they think that Paul's followers, Paul took whatever Christianity really was, if there ever was a really Christianity, and then just kind of went on his own way with that entirely, and then invented all these gospels, or maybe not him, but perhaps people who followed him, and so forth. The idea of a dying and rising Savior was foreign to Jewish thought and all that, and so he sort of inserted that into the matter. There are a few reasons this doesn't really stand up to any sort of really good scrutiny. So don't freak out, guys. If you come across this, there's no reason to. All right, you can look up all the stuff I'm going to talk about is stuff that people like Gary Habermas have gone over. It's similar arguments to stuff like William Lane Craig would bring up. I wouldn't always use William Lane Craig's arguments for everything, but in this realm, he's just dead on. And the simple fact of the matter is that even guys that are skeptics, who are non-Christians, the big skeptic of the day is Bart Ehrman. And Bart Ehrman would affirm pretty much everything I'm about to talk about. So, did Paul invent Christianity? Bart Ehrman would say no. He would say no. Paul talked to James, the brother of Jesus, and Peter for 15 days, just like Paul says he did. And he got the Christian traditions and theology, well, not theology, that's a bit of different. We get the main story of Jesus from them. He absolutely admits to this. He says he would like to have been there too, so that he could have corroborated this. Okay? Not a Christian. Skeptic. Fairly liberal. Still says, no, that's not what happened at all. If you ask him, he may not answer the question, because he would think it was too absurd to bother answering, frankly. But, Ehrman, from time to time, he answers absurd questions anyway. So, maybe he would, I don't know. Might write a book on it. He gets more money. But no, he wouldn't say that. Now, why wouldn't he say that? What reasons could he possibly have? Well, for one, given the content and structure of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he may think they were written well after the fact, and by not the people that the church fathers said they wrote, or who wrote them. So, like, if you go to the church fathers, you're going to be like, yeah, Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, and, yeah, some guy named John wrote John. Maybe it was John the Beloved, maybe it was John the Revelator, maybe those were all the same guy, maybe it was different guys, maybe, the John the Elder might have been yet a different guy. He might go off on some different things like that, right? Or Bart Ehrman would say, all these different Johns. And the church fathers, they're not real good at clarifying that either, frankly. I'm going to just go with it being 1 John because, frankly, that's just simpler. But maybe it could have been different guys. Who knows? All right? Point being that, even if he says, and he would, that we don't know who wrote these. He would never say that Paul wrote them. He would never say that a follower of Paul wrote them. Because he's going to pick out stylistic and somewhat theological differences among them, and between them as one set of things and what Paul would write. Paul was very focused on particular kinds of things, and he used very specific kinds of language for things that he would have passed down to anyone who was following him. The gospel writers, each of them had their own distinct styles and own distinct purposes. And each of them had very different emphasis and languages and things that they used within their own gospel accounts. And it wouldn't stand to reason that Paul or his followers would talk the way that they do in those gospels. They are written as though they are written by people after the fact, looking back on a historical event, what they believe to be a historical event, and they're written like they're written by people that live in different locations now and are recalling different things, and perhaps in the case of Matthew and Luke, looking back at Mark. I'm not certain if Matthew is there's a theory that Matthew was actually written before Luke, but that could be Matthew perhaps wrote a sayings book, not the Gospel of, and perhaps that was what was written before the book of Mark, and then later on Matthew, or Matthew in name, whoever, wrote the Gospel of Matthew, looking at the sayings book of Matthew, which was in Aramaic, at least in theory, and also Mark, and he sort of used more than one source, and could have also used Q, which was probably oral tradition. But never minding all of that, still, yet each one of the four being very independent kinds of witnesses and having very different kinds of focuses. I have no idea, but they just don't add up that way. That you just wouldn't expect that out of Paul's guys. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't possibly have happened. That having been said, something of a nail in the coffin for this view that Paul invented the death, burial, and resurrection narrative of Jesus doesn't stand up to the slightest bit of scrutiny, because in Corinthians, I think it's 1 Corinthians 15? Can't recall. Should have looked that up before I made the video. Whatever. There's an early creed where Paul talks about Jesus being crucified under Pontius Pilate, dead, and then raised again and seen by all these different people. And this is a creedal statement, we know, because of the cadence of the thing and the language used in it. Like, grammarians and textual critics know that this is what this is. It's a creedal statement written by Paul in this letter about 55 AD. We know when the letter was written because of different things. And if you were to trace that back, you would say, okay, well, when did Paul go to Corinthians? Well, we know when he went to Corinthians because of different language used and different things that were cited. Generally, he went there, I don't want to give too specific dates, but he was there in the 30s. Okay? And what he said then, what he said in his letter in 1 Corinthians is, I delivered this to you then. Okay? And generally, most people don't think that Paul is just a ahistorical lying scumbag. Like, virtually no one does. This is all very consensus scholarship, by the way. Anybody who's saying something against this is basically they're just giving their opinion, like just a wild, hairy opinion apart from everybody else. The long and the short of it is, they figure the saying, the creed itself, would have originated within 1 to 2 years, tops, from the day of the crucifixion. Now, whether you want to say like 30 AD, 33 AD, whatever, doesn't really matter. The point is, Bart Ehrman figures it was within a year. There's actually some people who think that the latest, based on the language of the thing, that it could have come about and been formulated was about 6 months from the time of the crucifixion. So, it's early. It's pre-Pauline, in point of fact. And that's not seriously disputed by virtually anyone. No one really thinks that that's pre-Pauline. So Paul invents this dying and rising Savior, except that he says that he delivered to them what he received, which would have been way beforehand. And you can't say in your... because 1 Corinthians is actually 2 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians is actually 3 Corinthians. He wrote a previous letter that he references that we just don't have. It would be great to have that letter. But in any case, he was writing to these people who could have seen this and gone, "You never said that. Are you crazy?" And then they would have had a whole dispute. But they don't do that. You don't write to people saying, "Remember when I said this to you?" if they didn't say it. So he was there and he said it. We know when he was there and we know when he said it. And if he was there and he said it then, it had to come before him, and he was there very shortly after converting. So it stands to reason. Historians have a very good reason for saying that this is a very early creed. And it is. It just is an early creed. So Paul didn't invent that. Well, if Paul didn't invent that, then where did he get it from? Well, he received it. He received it from James and Peter. Well, we have Peter's account of Jesus' life and crucifixion and resurrection. That's the Gospel of Mark. We don't have James's, but nevertheless, don't need it. So, yeah, I'm sorry. The Gospels just aren't from Paul or his followers decades after Paul. No one, and it's the weirdest thing ever. Basically, no scholarship really holds that up anymore. I think the person I'm talking to maybe learned all of this like 30, 40 years ago when this was a really popular view. It's not anymore. It is buried. It's dead and it's buried. It will never come back. It's the same with the idea of Jesus being a copy of Mithras and the like. That was a school from German thought who wanted to take all the Jewishness out of Jesus because they're anti-Semitic, go figure. And yeah, it's in that classification of scholarship. That was quaint and nice at the time based on bad information, but we have better information now, and so no, we don't think that anymore. So, at least within that one thing, no, we have great early attestation to the crucifixion of Jesus, both in and outside of the Bible, and we have great attestation that early Christians believed. We don't have proof that Jesus raised from the dead, but we have very, very good reasons and very good evidence that the earliest Christians, including the very followers who met Jesus, believed that they saw him raised from the dead. That is the scholarly consensus view. Even Bart Ehrman himself says, yeah, the apostles thought he was raised from the dead. Now, why he isn't a Christian, that's a separate issue altogether. I'm sure I'll never know. But you got great reasons to believe Jesus lived, that he died under Pontius Pilate by crucifixion, and that his followers thought he was raised from the dead, and that at least 4 of them, due to early 1st and, late 1st and early 2nd century sources, have them being martyred for preaching that exact message. So they were in a position to know. Doesn't make them right, but it gives it a lot of credence. So basically, don't worry about it. You got great legs to stand on. So stand firm. You'll be fine.